Whether it was competing with my siblings or trying to get attention from my parents, I wanted to show what I could do, what I was capable of accomplishing. I wanted results, and I was driven to find out the best way to get them. Of all the kids in my family, I was probably considered the one least likely to succeed. And this is an excerpt from the book we're going to talk about today, Driven from Within by Michael Jordan and Mark Vancil.
Welcome to Performers, the podcast that takes you into the minds of the world's most extraordinary athletes, coaches, and performers. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Greg Young, and you've just heard from Dr. Duncan Simpson. As sports psychology experts, we'll guide you through the pages of their autobiographies, revealing the mindsets, strategies, and habits that propelled the world's best to the pinnacle of their fields. Our goal is to help you learn from history's greatest performers. For each episode, we read and then condense entire autobiographies into concentrated insights representing over 20 hours of work per episode. You not only gain the collective wisdom of these elite performers, but also access over 30 years of our professional expertise in sports psychology. So listening to this, you're saving countless hours while accessing the distilled wisdom and proven strategies of the best in their fields.
Greg, can you believe this is episode 28 this year? And not to toot our own horn, beep beep. But these episodes do take a ton of preparation and effort to execute. Our goal, as always, is to bring as much value as possible to all of you tuning in. Now, here's the cool part. We've had thousands of downloads and listeners in over 70 countries. For me, that's absolutely mind-blowing. I couldn't imagine that when we started out. But here's the deal, dear listener. We can't keep growing this show without your support. So let's make a gentleman's agreement. You get all this great content for free, and in return, you take 30 seconds to do us a solid. Pause the show right now, head to your podcast app, and give us 5 stars and a bonus points if you can leave us a glowing review. It's like fuel for this podcast rocket ship. And if you're watching on YouTube, please make sure you hit the subscribe button. It's a small ask, but actually makes a huge difference to us.
It does. There's only the two of us paddling this canoe, and we need everyone's help out there to make it go a little bit faster. So Duncan, I am sure that everyone listening knows who Michael Jordan is, but before we dive in, we want to give a special shout out to our great friend of the show, Bobby Bond. Bobby, you're not only an avid listener, but our go-to person for episode reviews. So he's leading the charge when it comes to reviews. So who can keep up with Bobby Bond here? We absolutely love hearing your thoughts, Bobby. And given your status as perhaps the biggest Jordan fan out there, certainly the biggest Jordan fan that I know, this one's for you. So Duncan, with that said, why don't you start us off by highlighting some of Jordan's major accomplishments?
And it is quite the list, and I'll try and keep it as short as I can. As a college player, he was selected as an All-American in both 1983 and 1984. He was the Naismith and Wooden College Player of the Year in 1984. He was an NBA champion 6 times. He was the Finals MVP 6 times. He was the NBA MVP 5 times. He was an NBA All-Star 14 times. NBA All-Defensive Team 9 times, All-NBA First Team 10 times. He won Defensive Player of the Year in 1988, becoming the first player to win the scoring title and Defensive Player of the Year in the same season, which is madness. For USA Basketball, he won 2 Olympic gold medals. Of course, he is in the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, inducted in 2009. And last but not least, he partnered with Nike to create the Jordan brand, which in itself is a multi-billion-dollar company.
So Duncan, we've heard all about Michael Jordan. Tell us a little bit about this book.
Well, Greg, what a way to close out our first year of performers with the GOAT himself, Michael Jordan. He's undeniably on the Mount Rushmore of the greatest athletes of all time. But what makes Jordan so captivating for me isn't just his basketball skill and his athleticism, it's his mindset. Jordan himself has said repeatedly that it's his mindset more than anything is what sets him apart. I'll admit I've been procrastinating about this one because so much has already been written and said about Jordan. I mean, we've plugged the Last Dance documentary so many times that they should be cutting us a check by now.
Come on, Netflix, get your hand in your pocket.
Exactly. But what makes this book stand out is how it takes us beyond the basketball player. It's actually less about his stats and more about the man, his mindset, and the lessons that really made him the GOAT. Unlike, I'd say, a traditional autobiography, this book is more of a collection of snapshots, vignettes, and stories about his life. And many of them are actually told through the voices of those closest to him. So we'll hear from his mom and some of his teammates and coaches. And it also provides a fascinating glimpse into the Jordan brand, an empire in its own right, as I've mentioned. While we'll touch on that briefly, our focus today is on the lessons that we can draw from his journey as a performer, especially his psychological edge. We're not going to do a year by year breakdown of his career. We covered a lot of that in episode 23 when we explored the Bulls' years through the eyes of legendary coach Phil Jackson. If you haven't listened to episode 23, I highly recommend checking it out after this one. As always, we encourage everyone to go out, pick up and read the book themselves. There'll be a link in the show notes. So let's dive in and unpack what made Michael Jordan truly the greatest of all time.
I think that could be the first time you've used the word vignette in any of these podcasts.
It might be the first time I've ever said it in my life.
Evolution, baby.
Evolution. So the first quote is actually from his mum, and it says, "It could have gone either way with different parents who weren't there all the time. We were providing strong values to Michael. Would he fight with you? Yes. Even though sometimes he didn't understand what we were saying, we wanted him to know that what we were teaching him was designed to make him strong once he left our door. We knew where everybody was going. We knew who their friends were, and we knew their parents. We were involved in their lives." And back to Michael himself, he says, "My mother was very sentimental and understanding of what I wanted to do. My parents wanted me to be equipped to go out in the world and earn a living. For my mother, it was all about education. My father wanted me to be able to work with my hands, be mechanical, able to work with tools. He thought that if I could work with my hands, there would always be a job somewhere." And here's a great example of that, Greg. And he says, "If something was broken in our house, my father would teach himself how to fix it. We had a one-level home. Now, my father could have found an architect to draw up plans and a builder to add a second floor onto our house, but he did it himself. He'd come home after working all day and work on the house. When he was done, he knew it was done right. That was his nature. My mother was the same way. How could their kids not have the same approach, be it in school, a job, or playing a game? It all came downstream from them."
I mean, who hasn't thought about just knocking up a second floor on top of your house? That's a wild story. But what I love about this section is how it paints a really vivid picture of Michael's sort of mental foundation, to continue on the house analogy, I guess. So his parents were obviously sort of a yin and a yang of values. His mom was instilling the importance of education and maybe even that emotional intelligence. And his dad really emphasized self-reliance and problem-solving skills. Together, those four elements, as it were, really served as a blueprint and perhaps had a positive impact on his resilience. But what's remarkable for me is how this foundation was built through care and involvement. His mother said, we knew where everyone was going, we knew who his friends were, knew who their parents were. It wasn't about controlling their kids, but about creating that environment where they felt supported and where they felt accountable. And Michael, watching his father's problem-solving mentality, working all day and coming home to just whack another level on, that must have left a mark on Michael. It's the ultimate control what you can control lesson, right? If you can't afford an architect, learn to be one. That unrelenting drive paired with his mother's focus on education can't help but to have shaped his mindset, where failure just isn't an option because the family unit just wouldn't allow it. It's clear that their values didn't just guide the kids. It really, what's the word? I guess empowered them to thrive. Like he says, it all came downstream. I really like that phrase, downstream. Like with so many of our performers, you can't really understand them until you understand and get a glimpse into their parents and into their past.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, Greg, is that Michael actually had no desire to work with his hands, but that mentality of, well, I'll figure it out, I'll be a problem solver, is certainly one that he carried forward. And Greg, I want to close this section out with a quote from Howard H. White, who's the field rep who's largely credited with helping sign Michael Jordan to Nike. And he actually later served as the VP of the Jordan brand. And I think it kind of summarizes this. He says, "Michael Jordan is very, very astute and very intelligent. He had something that a lot of kids don't have, a mother and a father. So he came from a family that had direction, discipline, and the kind of foundation that can give people a chance in life." And this quote really helps kind of encapsulate his home life. I heard this recently and it kind of really stuck with me. And it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken adults. And Michael's parents certainly did a great job of building that strong child. With that, let's hear a little bit about Michael's passion. And he said, I had a passion for getting out on the playground and being my own person. I wanted to be different, to stand out, playing kickball and being the star because I was able to kick the ball on top of the building, hitting home runs, stealing bases, pitching, scoring 30 points, blocking a shot, dunking. All those things drove me. Having money to buy a pair of shoes never drove me. I figured if I was as good as I could be playing sports, eventually it would pay dividends. I wasn't a great athlete at the time, though I wanted to be. Playing sports was my way of moving up the ladder. It wasn't just about fitting in. I wanted to really fit in. I wanted to be admired, respected. I wanted the girls to respect me too. I didn't want to just carry their books. All of that drove me a lot more than most people think. I didn't want to be excluded from a grouping or laughed at because I didn't have any status. If that's what you saw, I was going to prove you wrong. Just watch me. That was my mentality. Greg, there's some real richness in there about his passion. What stands out for you?
I think that he wasn't just playing sports for fun, that he was using this to sort of build an identity for himself. And the playground obviously wasn't just a place to burn energy, it was a proving ground or a stage where you could carve out a sense of perhaps self-worth and respect. That you used that word quite a lot there. That hunger to be different, to stand out, isn't just about ego, I don't think. Maybe it's a little bit more about sort of self-determination and a little bit of control over your own destiny, as it were. And as he says, Michael didn't just want to fit in, he wanted to earn his place and redefine how other people, particularly those people around him, saw him. And that's a powerful motivator, especially for a kid who isn't naturally athletically gifted at the obviously at the start. And isn't the playground where just so many performers' journeys begin? That's where raw passion meets that unstructured opportunity, and it provides a space to test yourself, to fail, to come back stronger. And for Michael, it was the first place that he really learned to compete, to stand out, and to fight for respect. It's a little bit of a movie cliche, right? We always see these things on a street basketball court somewhere. So it's less about the game itself and more about the mentality that he's developing in those moments. And the other thing that's fascinating to me is his motivation. He wasn't motivated by status symbols like new shoes, ironically. It was about being admired, respected, and ultimately proving people wrong. And again, these are all building blocks for his identity. And let's not ignore his honesty here. It always comes down to this. It's about the girls, right? He wants to earn the girls' respect and be seen to be, let's face it, attractive in their eyes. So that drive to rise above exclusion or even ridicule, I think that's what fuels a competitive edge, transforming the sport that he's taking part into away from a pastime and into a pathway. And it's a reminder that the greatest performers often direct, or they channel deeply personal, perhaps even vulnerable motivations into something that can drive them to be extraordinary.
Greg, there was some absolute gold in there. I love how you highlight the playground as more than just a physical space. It's a place where so many identities and feelings of self-worth start to be forged. So, a lot of the listeners might have heard the story that Jordan was actually cut from his high school basketball team. And here's Jordan's version of this. And he says, I tried out for Coach Herring's varsity team when I was in 10th grade. The team was stacked, but I felt I was good enough to contribute. Coach Herring had another idea. I ended up playing junior varsity that whole season. When the JV season ended, players could be invited up to varsity, but Coach Herring didn't move me up, even though I had averaged 26 or 27 points a game. So I asked to be a statistician. I was willing to do just about anything to be part of the varsity. Coach Herring allowed me to go on trips, but the only way I could get into the visiting gym without buying a ticket was to carry someone else's uniform so it looked like I was part of the team. He picked me up every morning my junior year, took me to the basketball gym before school and worked me out. We'd shoot jump shots, play one-on-one, and work on ball handling drills because I couldn't handle the ball at all. We'd work out for an hour, then I'd shower and go to class. He loved challenging me. He was more or less my pusher. He was one of those coaches who just talked to you. You have to stay focused, MJ. You can't do this, MJ. Grades, man, grades. Those were the things he would talk to me about every day. The reality, Greg, at this time, 10th grade, it sounds like Jordan simply wasn't good enough to make varsity, but I love what Coach Herring does, and he's investing in a really young Michael Jordan, picking him up every morning of his junior year and taking him to the gym to work him out.
I think we've heard a lot of stories about people that were perhaps early developers within their sport and have been child prodigies almost, right? Simone Biles is obviously someone that jumps out into my mind. It sounds like we've got a little bit of the opposite here where you're right, he's just not good enough and he's a little bit of what it appears to be a late developer. But what I really like here is a little bit of myth busting that Jordan being cut from his high school team. I think that notion gets romanticized and people can use it for use it for fuel and whatever motivates them, which, hey, if that works for you, it works for you. But the reality, as he shares here, is it's much more relatable. He just wasn't ready yet, plain and simple. What makes it cool for me is how he refused to just let that be the end of the story, being willing to carry uniforms just to stay close to the team. But how many other people are just willing to do that, just to be around that environment? And I think you're right about Coach Herring. He certainly didn't dismiss Michael as not ready. He invested in him, maybe as a project is a little bit unfair, but definitely saw something in him in a way to invest in him. Those early mornings in the gym, the one-on-ones, they've really planted the seeds for the work ethic and the focus that will absolutely go on to later define Jordan's greatness. And it's a testament to the role of a coach here. And as we've talked about with numerous coaches on this podcast, it is more than just the X's and the O's. Herring didn't just see what Michael was in that moment. He had the foresight to see what he could become and helped to sort of give him the tools to get there. That's the kind of mentorship that every young athlete or every young person deserves.
I'm not sure anyone could have predicted what he would actually end up becoming, but Coach certainly is investing in a young person here when he needed it the most. I like a thought experiment, but does Michael ever become the player he does without Coach Herring investing those moments with him? Who knows? However, in this next section, there's a really tangible example of where Coach clearly impacts Michael's career, and it's all about getting Michael into a basketball camp. And he says, Coach Herring lied to get me into the 5-star basketball camp in Philadelphia between my junior and senior years in high school. I wasn't on anyone's list. You couldn't find me ranked anywhere because no one knew I existed. I literally came out of nowhere. That's impossible today. There are scouting services evaluating 12-year-olds. Back then, no one was looking for basketball players in Wilmington, North Carolina. I grew almost 4 inches to 6'3.5" that summer. I was really kind of clumsy, but I had a great junior year, so Coach Herring decided he needed to get this kid some publicity. The only way you could get into a 5-star camp was by being one of the best ranked players in the country. I wasn't ranked anywhere by anybody. Coach Herring told them I averaged 35 points, 20 rebounds, and 8 assists. That's how I got in. When my father drove me to Philadelphia to drop me off, that was the first time I had ever been to a basketball camp. I won 5 trophies the first week. Before my father came back to get me, they asked him if I could stay another week. Howard Garfinkel, who ran the camp, told my father, Mr. Jordan, if you let him stay, I guarantee you he will get a 4-year full scholarship. He might even be a McDonald's All-American. I was full of energy that second week. I thought I must be doing something right. All I wanted to do was improve, to keep getting better. It was like the blood started rushing. I became a sponge. I got a glimpse of what success looked like. I saw where I fit in with the best players in the country, and they were all there. Chris Mullin, Patrick Ewing. That's when my parents started to believe that this kid could amount to something. My mother was very adamant about me making the grades. If I didn't make the grades, she wouldn't let me play basketball. My father just kept saying, keep playing, keep working. My mother never believed that sports should be ahead of education. She still believes that today. My father was beginning to see the same things that I was seeing. Greg, there's a lot there, but perhaps a sliding doors moment where Coach Herring lies and gets him into this basketball camp.
Without a doubt, this is an incredibly important moment in Michael's career. The line, I got a glimpse of what success looks like, that's really profound. It's the kind of moment that can really redefine someone's trajectory. And at the 5-star camp, Michael, he didn't just play basketball. He saw firsthand really what it meant to compete with the best, to measure himself against the elite. But it was about proving to himself that he could hang and he could be in that echelon of player. That kind of exposure, I think, is transformative. Once you see what's possible, it's almost impossible to unsee it. It plants that seed of belief that you can grow into something extraordinary. He didn't meet his hero like we've seen other performers, but he did meet his peers who were supposed to be the best, and that provided that yardstick for him. What is also equally important is how this moment affects his parents. Michael talks about how they started to see what Coach Herring was saying, that this kid could truly amount to something. And his mom, with just an unyielding insistence on education, ensured that success on the court never overshadowed the success that he had in the classroom. But alongside that, his dad's steady encouragement to keep playing and keep working really gave him the permission for him to chase his dreams without losing that footing that he'd set on. It's a powerful dynamic when you have parents that root a kid in values while beginning to believe in larger aspirations. Moments like these show how a family's belief can amplify an individual's ambition. So overall, I don't think that camp was just about skill development. That would have just kind of happened in proxy. It was about identity development for him. It was giving Michael tangible evidence that he wasn't just another player from Wilmington. He was someone who could stand shoulder to shoulder with potential future legends. And for any performer, moments like this where you see what's possible, that really can be life-altering, as it was in this case.
Greg, I love that. Seeing what's possible is just so powerful. So let's hear a little more about his vision or lack of vision regarding what he could become. And he says, when I was growing up in Wilmington, North Carolina, we could only see two television stations, NBC and ABC. I never watched NBA basketball as a kid. I watched college games. We couldn't pick up an NBA game. Most of what I did growing up was born out of a desire to be the best player in Wilmington or the best player in the park that day. I didn't have any sense of being the best player in the world or playing in the NBA because I didn't have any idea what it took. I didn't even know what it looked like. But I had no doubts or fears because I never had expectations that were out of context with my skill level. My expectations were very low. I wanted to be the best player at the park in Wilmington. I wanted to be better than my brothers or the other guys in the neighborhood. These were my expectations. Make the varsity team, impress the coach, get a 4-year scholarship to a major college. With each progression, I gained confidence. Everything was in its place. I came from a small town. No one knew who I was. Everyone was getting well publicized, but I had to lie to get that status. Once I did, there were people who thought I was too good to be true, so they challenged me, which was right in line with how I went about everything. I didn't get tarnished by national attention or success at a young age. I didn't experience the spoils. I always felt like I had to prove myself one way or another. When I did get attention, I wanted to show people that I deserved it. That approach carried me through my entire career. That was my strength. I never lost the desire to work hard, set goals, and achieve. That never went away from me. Greg, something that jumps out for me is that he never dreamed of the NBA simply because he never knew much about it.
Well, they say ignorance is bliss, right? And who knows what might have happened if he had regular access to it. But I think it really highlights how small that initial vision was and how it's worked to his advantage. He wasn't dreaming of being the best player in the world or dominating the NBA because he just didn't know what it looked like. His sights were set on achievable, incremental goals: be the best at the park, make the varsity team, get a college scholarship. It's very sort of lockstep. It's almost a bit Dan Carter-esque, as it were, just kind of moving through challenge by challenge as it presents itself. By keeping his expectations aligned with his skill level, he avoided the paralysis of the fear, as he calls it, that can come from chasing something too big too soon. Instead, he built confidence one step at a time, brick by brick. And that's such a critical lesson. Success often starts with mastering the moment in front of you. By focusing on what's within reach, Michael created a foundation of work ethic and resilience that would later support his rise to greatness. Even when the national spotlight eventually found him, he never really let that change his approach. He kept that mindset of proving himself, staying hungry, never settling, always pushing to be as good as he could be in that moment. That's a reminder that you don't have to see the entire path to greatness right away. Sometimes just focusing on being the best in your small world is the first step to conquering the bigger one. Al Pacino said it best in Any Given Sunday, right? The 6 inches in front of your face. If you can conquer that, you're on your way.
Once again, there's so much great stuff in there. I love that you don't have to see the entire path to greatness and instead taking those small steps. And honestly, that's a perfect segue into this section. And he says, all I knew is that I never wanted to be average. Whatever I was going to do, I wanted to do it my way. I just wanted the freedom to express myself. It wasn't about trying to be different for the sake of being different. I just wanted to follow what I felt. My father put a challenge in front of me. I knew what he expected, but I expected even more. The expectations I had for myself were beyond my father's expectations. My thoughts were way beyond the idea of preparing myself for a job so that I could be like the guy down the street. I had dreams. They were my dreams, and I had no fear of them. A lot of kids today need reinforcement. They need a pat on the back. Back in those days, if you didn't get a pat on the back, you better pat yourself on the back and keep moving. At least it was that way for me. And that knowledge helped me understand some things. I told myself whatever I did in life was going to be done my way. I knew I had to abide by the classic rules. I knew right from wrong. I wanted to be different. Greg, there's absolute gold in there. I never wanted to be average. I wanted to do it my way. I had dreams. There's just so much great stuff.
Well, we were just talking there about how he had no expectations, and his dad had lower expectations than that. How low were his dad's expectations? But you're right, this section it's absolutely packed with gold, as you say. I never wanted to be average. That's the mindset that separates good from great. It's not about being better than other people. It really is about refusing to settle for less than your best. And that line, I wanted to do it my way, as Frank Sinatra sings it in my head, that speaks volumes about authenticity. I'm not going to sing it. I'll save you all from that.
Please do.
You're right. Well, you didn't sing Eminem, so I'm not singing Frank Sinatra. That seems fair enough. But I've lost my train of thought here. Well, okay, we'll go back to it. So Michael wasn't chasing someone else's version of success. It was about him and what he wanted to achieve, and he had the courage to define his own path and the confidence, more importantly, to just walk it, even when it maybe went against the grain. So let me go back to that line. I had dreams. I had no fear of them. That's huge. How many people hold themselves back because their dreams intimidate them? And I think we heard this in episode, well, what was it, episode 26 with Perlo?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was talking about youth players when he was at Brescia, one of his very early clubs that were running scared of their own dreams. And what he did in a very simple way was flipping the why me into a why not me mentality. And Michael definitely showed this as well. And he had the rare ability to really embrace those ambitions without fear, trusting that his work ethic and his resilience, that would be the thing that would bridge the gap between the dream and reality. So this whole section for me, it's a bit of a manifesto for anyone who wants to dream big and stay true to themselves while doing it. So I would say stop, rewind, and probably listen to this section again.
You're right. Please stop, rewind, listen to this again. This is a mindset manifesto from one of the greatest athletes of all time. So this mentality that you just talked about, Greg, in depth really plays out when he's deciding where to play in college. And he says, when it came time for me to decide on colleges, I had all kinds of people telling me to go to the Air Force Academy or to a smaller college where I would be assured of playing. I'm saying, I've got higher dreams than that. I'm going to North Carolina. I'm going to a place no one else from my town has ever gone. You can say whatever you want, but I'm going. If I had to sit on the bench, at least I'm going to learn how to sit on the bench with the best. One teacher said, you'll be back here in Wilmington pumping gas if you don't go to the Air Force Academy. Yeah, we'll see about that.
Some solid education right there. Gotta love it. Gotta love a real inspiring. That's a fucking Dead Poet Society move right there, isn't
it? Fantastic. You'll be pumping gas. I don't know that Jordan's done a lot of pumping gas in his life.
Probably not.
And he says, I know my parents worried about me amounting to anything, much less someone whose dreams extended beyond Wilmington, North Carolina. But I wanted to become more than a slightly better version of someone else. I knew I was going against the grain a fair amount of time, but I came to realize that was just part of the process. Greg, he's going to UNC. It doesn't matter what anybody says. Jordan's made up his mind. He's going, isn't he?
Yeah, this is by hook or by crook. It's an unshakable belief in himself and his dreams. He says, I'm going to North Carolina. He wants to be that person from his hometown, the first to do it. Put simply, he's betting on himself even when he knows that there are safer options available. But it's all about putting yourself in the environment where just greatness is the standard. It is what's expected. And the contrast between the vision that he has and the expectations of the small town and the people around him, that's really striking. The teacher telling him he's going to end up pumping gas, it's almost laughable now, but you can feel how much it fueled him.
Boom, boom. Good pun.
Yeah, no pun intended. As you say, the only gas he's been pumping has been into his Rolls Royce. I really like the saying, if you want to kill a dream, share it with a small-minded person. So fortunately, Michael ignores his teacher, but how many people's dreams have been shattered by other people even before it started?
Yeah.
Michael didn't just want to leave Wilmington. He wanted to rewrite what was possible for someone to be there. And Another basketball pun, I guess. He wanted to be a trailblazer, right? It's a reminder that sometimes dreaming big means going against the grain, and he repeatedly uses that phrase, but being okay with the discomfort that comes along with that. And you said it before, you can't discover new lands without leaving sight of the shore. I really love that phrase. And he's determined to see what the world has in store for him.
You fucking stealing my quotes again.
I mean, I've cited you here. What more do you want?
And of course, once he gets to North Carolina, he's going to be mentored by legendary coach Dean Smith. And here are a few of Michael's reflections of his time at North Carolina. And he says, Coach Smith would challenge you mentally. He made you think. He never cursed at anybody. He was the perfect guy for me. He kept me humble, but he challenged me. He gave me confidence by giving me compliments when he thought I needed them. But I was totally afraid of Coach Smith because he was a big name in the state of North Carolina, and I was a kid from a small city. I never even thought about calling him anything other than Coach Smith. It was intimidating the way he controlled practice. I have never seen practice controlled the way it was at North Carolina. Every minute was thought out. If a drill was supposed to end at 3:10, it ended at 3:10 and the next one started. I was shocked at how he got into practice, how he controlled every minute, how he taught. They made practice challenging, which was right down my alley. They made it fun to learn. I'm listening to what the coaches want and I'm competing my ass off. I'm trying to impress all of them. I'm not trying to con anybody. I'm competing and I'm trying to earn the highest accolades. I wanted them to know that I listened, that I applied what I was learning, that I worked hard every single day. I wanted them to know I could be the first guy onto the floor and the last one to leave.
This sounds like Coach Smith's really striking the perfect balance between humility and challenge here, giving Michael that confidence when he needs it, so that pat on the back that Michael doesn't have to give himself, but never letting him get complacent. And the fact that Michael was intimidated by Smith's reputation, but respected him deeply, shows how that dynamic between the two of them really pushed him to rise to the challenge. The attention to detail in practice, I think, is a bit of a coaching masterclass. When he talks about every minute being thought out, that can seem rigid, but it creates a structure where players can thrive. This is really similar to stories that I've heard about the great UCLA basketball coach, John Wooden, where he literally had programs written down and drills written down on note cards, and it went to the absolute moment. For Michael coming into this environment, one that's controlled, one that's challenging, one that's particularly focused on competition, this is like adding fuel to the fire. He wasn't just learning basketball skills, he was learning discipline, he was learning focus. He's learning the value of showing up every single day, knowing that he has to be ready to compete.
And what's interesting to me is how he took these lessons both from his parents and Coach Smith and then applied them to all facets of his life. And he's kind of reflecting here because it's a little bit obviously later on in his career. And he says, leading and staying true, authentic to those fundamental values that flowed downstream from my parents and later Coach Smith. Moving through the business world full time, I recognize that the structure of success is no different there than it was on the basketball court. Great companies have a lot in common with great teams. Players who practice hard when no one is paying attention generally play well when everyone is watching. Success at any level can be reverse engineered to reveal the same architecture.
Duncan, let me jump in there. I love that quote. Let me read it again. Success at any level can be reverse engineered to reveal the same architecture. To be frank, that's exactly what we're trying to do on Performers. We're trying to reverse engineer and learn the lessons from history's greatest performers. I also think it shows a lot of the lessons that we discover here on Performers are pretty much activity agnostic. I think Jordan would actually really like this podcast.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
If anyone has any connections to get this into the hands of Michael Jordan, first of all, how do you know us? Second of all, let's do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do it.
So a little bit of a summary here just to set the scene about Jordan's career at North Carolina. Of course, he was a standout college player at North Carolina, and the team went 88-13. As a freshman, he won ACC Freshman of the Year honors, and he famously hit the game-winning shot in the 1982 NCAA Championship game over Georgetown. Over 3 seasons when Jordan was there, he averaged 17.7 points a game, 5 rebounds, and 1.8 assists per game, earning back-to-back first-team All-American selections in 1983 and 84. And in 1984, as I've already mentioned, he won both the Naismith and the Wooden College Player of the Year awards before eventually leaving early to the NBA draft. Jordan later completed his degree in geography in 1986. He went back and finished while he was playing, which is an interesting take. So, Greg, a bit of a pop quiz for you. Michael Jordan was drafted third overall in the 1984 NBA draft by the Chicago Bulls. Who went number one and two?
Oh, shit. Um, I'd just like to say I'm glad he went back and finished that geography degree. There's not enough people with geography degrees in this world. I do know the first one. Oddly, that's a bit of random trivia. I do know. I know it was Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon. I'm pretty sure he spent his whole career at the Rockets. I could be wrong. The second, I have absolutely no clue.
The second overall pick was Sam Bowie, who was selected by the Portland Trail Blazers and did not have the career that Hakeem the Dream did.
Mm.
So, along with Hakeem the Dream and Jordan, the 84 class is still considered one of the greatest of all time, with other future Hall of Famers, including John Stockton, Charles Barkley, and Brazilian Oscar Schmidt. He is the forgotten superstar of that draft and played pro basketball for 29 years, apparently.
29 years. If we can get our hands on Oscar Schmidt's autobiography, best believe that's happening on Performers.
Absolutely. I'd never heard of him, but he is in the Basketball Hall of Fame. So,
hang on, 29 years? Where's he played professional basketball for 29 years?
well, not all in the NBA. He was Brazilian.
Oh, okay. Brazilian professional basketball. The dizzying heights of the professional basketball
Well, he
league in
did
Brazil.
play in the NBA.
Okay. I think we found a more interesting protagonist here.
We'll have to cut some of this.
Maybe. It's all good stuff.
Okay, so he's had a great college career and he's getting drafted. And of course, he's getting a lot of attention from Nike, who at the time were not a predominant player in the basketball space, which was really dominated by Converse, a shoe that he wore in college, and Adidas. And this is a little bit of this recruiting time from Nike and Jordan. And he says, in August 1984, at the insistence of my mother and father, I boarded a plane to Portland, Oregon. That day, I met Phil Knight for the first time. Neither of us could have imagined what the next 20 years together would produce. Has it been a perfect partnership? No. But nothing of value comes without hard work, particularly when the objective is to create something no one could have even envisioned. Howard H. White has said Nike was the perfect place for two people as competitive as Phil and me because we could plug into one another in an atmosphere that reflected our aspirations. I think that's probably true. We might have come from different places, but we've always shared a commitment to creating products that reflect the same fundamental values. And this is a little bit from Howard White. He says, we all know how competitive Michael Jordan is. Nike is an extraordinarily competitive place. Phil is a pretty competitive guy. Nike wanted to take over the world. Michael wanted to take over the world of basketball. So that drive was mirrored from one to the other. So Greg, although we're dipping our toes into the business world here with Michael and Nike, it just seems like another lesson in matching individual skill set with the right environment, I would say.
Couldn't agree more, Duncan. The partnership with Nike is such a great example of what happens when the right individual plugs into the right environment. Michael's drive and competitive fire found a perfect match in Nike's equally relentless ambition to take over the basketball world. It's not just about skill or talent, it's about having that alignment. Both Michael and Nike shared a vision, a work ethic, and that unapologetic desire to be the best, so it's no surprise it was a great fit. No pun intended.
Boom, boom. Oh my
Boom,
God.
boom.
Some bad jokes. So we're going to transition into his early days with the Chicago Bulls. And he says, in those days, no rookie was expected to come into the league and challenge the status of the veteran guys. So I didn't have to be concerned with looking over my shoulder or trying to live up to the expectations created by a marketing campaign. What I did on the floor drove the marketing, not the other way around. The Jordan brand was driven by what I did every night playing the game. I came to Chicago with no expectations, none. The only pressure I felt when I went to the NBA was to prove I deserved to play on that level. And that was easy because it was a step-by-step process. Playing hard every day in practice, playing against veteran teammates, making the starting five, then playing against NBA players in games. No one knew I was capable of scoring, and no one tried to define me by putting a number to those expectations. I understood the reason I was getting attention was because of the work I had put in up to that point, not because of what I had done to meet other people's expectations for me. And he goes on to say, even when I went to Chicago, no one knew my true ability because I played within a system in North Carolina. Coach Smith's system wasn't about excelling at one phase of the game. He was about excellence in every phase of the game, scoring, rebounding, passing, and playing defense. But in this era, the process is flipped. No one had to market Michael Jordan. I marketed myself by what I did on the court. It's easy to see a guy averaging 30 points a game and then use him as a marketing tool for your product. It's a lot more difficult to take a guy you hope can play, market him as a 30-point scorer, and then find out he's not nearly the player your marketing platform promised. You can't fake out a consumer. Some of these kids today can never live up to the expectations created for them.
Duncan, this is again another masterclass in focusing simply on what matters, and that is the work. He's come in with a simple goal to prove that he deserves to be there, and it wasn't about what others expected of him, and I feel like that's a reoccurring theme. It's about what he expects of himself, a step-by-step approach, dominate in practice, earn your spot, take it on the court. That, again, is such a powerful lesson for any performer in any field. You can't skip those steps if you want long-lasting success. If you want short-term gain, you can try and jump ahead, but you want that long-lasting success, it's got to be bit by bit. And again, he's got that wherewithal to understand that he doesn't need a marketing machine behind him to create an image. It's his game that's speaking for itself. That idea that today it's flipped, that it's about young players being really marketed and expectations being put on them before they've proven anything. It creates a high expectations and massive amounts of pressure. So Michael's story is a reminder that real sustainable growth and ultimately greatness is built on what you do when no one's watching. You can't fake that kind of excellence. It has to come from the work day in, day out, consistently repeated, boring, do it again, over and over and over again.
I love that. You can't fake excellence. And he says, will there be another Michael Jordan? Sure. There is no doubt a player will come along who will be able to build on what I have accomplished, just as I built on the example of great players before me. But it won't be as easy for the next Michael Jordan. Today, players receive rewards before they prove their worth. If you look around, you'll see that it happens in a lot of places, not just sports. The big NBA contract comes with the big shoe contract. With those contracts come national commercials. With that kind of notoriety comes expectations, some of which are bound to be out of proportion to the player's experience and ability. There were no expectations for me. Sure, I was picked third in the NBA draft, and I received a contract worth a lot of money at the time, but no one expected me to become the player I became. I came under the radar to a certain degree. Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Julius Erving were the clear stars in 1984. Greg, we're hearing this really familiar theme about earning your rewards, but Jordan here is emphasizing that importance of managing expectations and the pitfalls of perhaps receiving accolades and rewards before you've actually truly earned them.
When rewards like contracts, endorsements, media attention, all of that stuff arrive before the performance does to actually back them up, that's a really dangerous disconnect for a performer. Players can get trapped by that expectations that just outpace their growth. And when it really doesn't match the hype, and we see this we see this time and time again, the fall can be absolutely devastating for someone. So Michael's path being a little bit different. He came in under the radar behind, I can't even remember the second pick's name, and Sam Bowie. You come in there, there's not a ton of expectation. He comes in under that radar. No one's expecting him to come in and just redefine the game as it stands. That gives him the space to focus on the work and certainly not the spotlight. I don't know if that's going to happen today. That might actually be impossible. And of course, it's not just a sports issue, is it? So Jordan's story, that's a reminder that greatness isn't built on hype. It's got to be built on substance. He let his game speak for itself and everything else followed naturally. And that's why we talk about him. That's why his legacy endures, because it's earned step by step, not given to him. To put it another way, Duncan, the importance of foundations, building a strong foundation is like putting pants on before leaving the house. It's not flashy, but skipping it leads to disaster.
I was going to highlight another quote you said, but that one's a killer. I love that greatness isn't built on hype, it's built on substance.
And wearing trousers.
And wearing trousers, I should add that. So here's a little reflection for one of his Bulls teammates, Rod Higgins, who was a Bulls player between 1982 and 85. And he says, you couldn't help but notice this guy was different from all of us who were already there with the Bulls. His practice habits were unmatched. He didn't say a lot initially, but his level of effort, his level of competing stood out. If the other guys didn't take their effort up, then Michael had no problem embarrassing them. And this is back to Michael, and he says, my practice habits were great. I forced those other guys to improve their practice habits. I challenged them because Bulls coach Kevin Lowry challenged me. At the end of practice, we would scrimmage, and the losers had to run. We'd be killing the second team, and Lowry would stop practice and put me on the second team. We'd come back and win. Those were things the other guys started to learn. I practiced hard every day because I wanted every one of my teammates to know what I expected out of myself. If I took a day off, then I knew they would too. Just like my high school coach, Clifton Pop Herring, used to say, it's hard, but it's fair, and I live by those words.
Duncan Rod Higgins nails it here. He says Michael's leadership wasn't about words, it was about setting a relentless standard through action. That's huge. That sums it up perfectly. He doesn't try and embarrass them. He just tries to show them what effort really looks like in this environment. So he's raising the bar for everyone just by refusing to lower his own bar. He didn't push himself. He just pushed the entire team to match that intensity. And that's leadership in its purest form. It's not standing behind people and pushing them forward. It's about being out in front and inspiring people to follow you, leading by example and making everyone else around you better in that process. We know, definitely we know that his leadership wasn't always comfortable for people around him, but that's the point. Growth happens in discomfort.
Yeah, I love that we've talked about that growth happening in discomfort. And I recently heard him accent that really kind of resonated with me, and it was that comfort is the worst form of addiction. The Bulls team at the time, they really suffered from a lot of comfort. They really weren't challenging themselves. And when I think about many of our performers, I would agree with that, that discomfort is really where growth occurs. So we mentioned a little bit about his leadership, but let's hear from Michael himself. And he says, great leaders are those who lead by example first. You can't demand respect simply because of a title or position and expect people to follow. That might work for a little while, but in the long run, people respond to what they see. They might listen, but they usually act based on the actions of the person talking. If a CEO skips out early on Fridays, then he or she has sent the message that tells everyone else they can do the same. I was taught to conduct myself in that manner from day one at North Carolina. We had to wear suits, jackets, and ties to games, and I believed in that approach. No one ever saw me going to a game in jeans or sweats. The first impression you make is in the way you are dressed. If you dress like a bum, then they're going to treat you like a bum. If you dress like a hoodlum, they're going to treat you like a hoodlum. If you dress like a businessman, they're going to respect you and treat you like a businessman. From then on, all I wore was suits and jackets. That is me. At the beginning of my career, I couldn't be a vocal leader. I was afraid to speak to veteran guys, most of whom weren't making as much money as I was. They had to have a level of envy to start with, so I felt I had to be very cautious. My leadership came from action, all action. I had to pick my friends very carefully, like Rod Higgins, to ensure I stayed focused and grounded. A leader has to be willing to sacrifice to help everyone else get to where the team needs to go. No one could take days off with the Bulls because I never took a day off. Horace Grant and I had a falling out because he wanted a day off here and there, and I would chastise him about it. Early in my career, I challenged Orlando Woolridge, and he wanted to fight me. Greg, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Everyone wants to be great until they figure out what it takes. But what are your thoughts on his leadership style here?
First and foremost, it's crystal clear. It's lead by example. And the thing he's got to back that up is that he understands that respect isn't demanded, it's earned through consistent actions. So early on, he's let his actions do the talking, particularly when he's navigating the dynamics with those veteran players. He can't just sort of come in and stamp his authority on things. But his willingness to hold his teammates accountable, even at the risk of that conflict, even coming to blows, as it were, that shows his commitment to team success over his own personal comfort. And it sounds very much like he wasn't afraid to push people simply because he pushed himself harder than anyone else. And that's the essence of his leadership: relentless, uncompromising, and leading from the front, as I mentioned.
Yes, and as you said before, his leadership style wasn't always comfortable for others. Very similar to what we heard in episode 8 from Kobe Bryant, who wasn't always easy to play with. So here's a little more about his approach, and he says, if you want to win, you have to pay the price. It's not that complicated. If somebody didn't want to hear that from me, fine, but go play somewhere else. Come on, man. You might be sick, but you can still play. I remember when we were playing Detroit and one of our guys was bent over after getting hit. I said, don't let them see you in pain. You know why? Because they're going to do it again. And that's going to take your mind off what you need to be doing. Show that you can stand up to whatever they have to give. Let them know it's not affecting you and they won't do it again. But every time you wimp out, bitch about it, or cry to the referee, all I'm going to say is, shut up, let's play. You know what they're going to try to do. Don't let it happen. Play right on through all that stuff. That's when the Chicago Bulls started to get tough, when everyone else learned how to play through all the crap Detroit threw onto the floor. Greg, it's unquestionable how effective Michael was as a leader, but just to play devil's advocate, are there downsides to this kind of relentless approach of his?
Well, sure. His approach worked for him and the Bulls in that moment with the makeup of that team. But that kind of relentless, demanding leadership can be absolutely polarizing. And Kobe Bryant was another great example of that, as you mentioned. Not everyone responds well to being pushed through pain or adversity in such a blunt and sometimes uncaring or seemingly uncaring way. Now, you can argue that that's a tough love approach, and that risks alienating teammates that need a different type of leadership. If that's the only thing that you've got and the only thing you can keep go to, and people require something a little bit more empathetic or a little bit more adaptable, then there's the question of sustainability. If you're constantly demanding this level of mental and physical toughness, that very quickly leads to burnout, resentment, some not particularly good outcomes. Not everyone is wired the same way that Michael Jordan is, and the expectation that they should be can sometimes ignore individual differences in motivation or resilience or mental toughness, whatever you want to call it. So would the Bulls have had the same success if this approach had pushed key players away from Michael instead of pulling them in towards him? It's worth asking if a different leadership style, one that tries a little bit more to balance toughness with a little bit more encouragement, kind of like what he got from Dean Smith, that pat on the back when he needed it, could that have achieved the same results without that potential for friction?
It is a really interesting thought experiment, and that intensity, his competitiveness, and that toughness really remind me a lot of Pat Summitt and her leadership style that we talked a lot about in episodes 5 and 6. And while she maintained those qualities throughout the career, she definitely evolved, learning to adapt her approach to meet the individual needs of the players. At the same time, while still upholding those standards that she really held true for the Lady Vols.
I couldn't agree more. And for those people that haven't gone and listened to those two Pat Summitt episodes, that is, and I know I've used the word masterclass like 3 or 4 times here, that is an absolute masterclass in coaching, in leadership, in motivation. So I strongly encourage you, if you haven't, go back and listen to episodes 5 and 6 for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate the plug. She definitely evolved over her career, but still maintained those high standards. So, Greg, we're going to jump into his motivation a little bit here. And this first quote is from Tinker Hatfield, who was really that creative genius behind the Jordan brand. And he says, "When you see Michael Jordan, you see a man who is now called the best ever. But you only see the exterior. You see the force, the bald head, the long, lanky body. But what drove that machine is far bigger than what it produced on the outside. The difference is that it resides inside him. It is relentless." And Jordan goes on to say, "Look around and just about any person or entity achieving at a high level has the same focus. The morning after Tiger Woods rallied to beat Phil Mickelson at the Ford Championship in 2005, he was in the gym at 6:30 to work out. No lights, no cameras, no glitz or glamour. Uncompromised. It was the idea somebody might be sitting there who had never seen Michael Jordan play. I thought about that person who had never experienced the excitement or entertainment I could provide. That would be the thought that drove me to play that game. My motivation might come from somewhere else the next night. I had to search out and find reasons to play every game at a high level. I would wake up in the morning thinking, okay, how am I going to attack today? I never knew what my motivation would be until sometime during the day. It wasn't as easy as I went along because I had accomplished so much. I had to trick myself. I almost had to find a test within a test." Greg, we saw a lot of this in the Last Dance documentary. Michael had that uncanny ability to create stories in his mind about his opponents, and he'd latch onto anything, a comment, a gesture, anything that might be a perceived slight to really fuel his motivation and elevate his game.
Yeah, there were some great examples of that in there. What's fascinating for me is that his motivation isn't static. It evolved and continued to adapt as he went through his career. And the idea of playing for that hypothetical person who'd never seen him play before, that's a really profound example of that. as I've said before, you have to have multiple sources of motivation, different wells that you can go to when maybe one's running a little bit dry. What else can you rely on? And Jordan's a master at that.
And of course, he also had some amazing coaches who we've mentioned. Phil Jackson, episode 23, go back, have a listen, who knew how to push the right buttons. And this is Michael talking about some of his coaches. And he says, sometimes it was about a coach who was going to create some special defense designed to stop me. Even Phil Jackson in the late years started trying to challenge me. He'd say, MJ, you're not going to be able to do your post-up move tonight because you're playing against a bigger guy. So I would use that motivation, and that became the fuel for that night. I always looked at it as if Phil was trying to challenge me, not trying to criticize me. Tex Winter used to criticize me all the time. Tex would tell me, you're probably the worst passer I have ever seen. I'd say, yeah, but I'm probably the best scorer you've ever seen, so why would I pass?
Fair point.
Yeah, fair point. I look at the kids today and they don't know how to trick themselves. They don't even understand the need to find the way to get yourself ready to play at the highest level every night. I focus on little things. Little things add up to big things.
I really like that. You're right. And coaches like that know how to push the right buttons. Not, certainly for Michael, not coddling him, but challenging him in a way that really, I guess, just throws a can of gasoline onto his competitive fires. And again, you mentioned it there previously, episode 23, Phil Jackson, another great one to go back and listen to. We have fortunately covered some great coaches and performers, and that one was a real highlight. So episode 23, go back and listen to that one.
So we're going to jump ahead a little bit to Barcelona and the 92 Dream Team. And this is quite ridiculous. Greg, for any basketball aficionados out there, they might be able to recite this team, but I thought I'd look it up and just relay the names on this team. There was 12 players. Here are the players. Charles Barkley, Larry Bird, Clyde Drexler, Patrick Ewing, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Karl Malone, Chris Mullin, Scottie Pippen, David Robinson, John Stockton, and Christian Laettner, who was on the team but was still in college. All of them, except Christian Laettner, are actually in the Hall of Fame.
Sam Bowie didn't make the 92 Dream Team?
Sam Bowie did not make the 92 Dream Team.
What about, oh no, Oscar Schmidt, Brazilian, couldn't play with him.
but just a phenomenal team.
I mean, that is literally a who's who of basketball.
Yeah. So there's a little section on the 92 team, and he says, the 1992 Barcelona Olympics was one of the best times in my life. We're talking about the greatest players in the world, guys who had every story written about how great they were, all the things they could do and had done on the basketball court. All I thought about was, I have to see all this for myself. I want to see what these guys were all about. That was my motivation for going to the Olympic Games in 1992. I had won a gold medal in 84 and we were coming off back-to-back titles and I was exhausted with all the business commitments. But I had to see these guys for myself. I played against them, but I wanted to see how they practice. I wanted to see if Clyde Drexler, Karl Malone, David Robinson and the rest of them were competitive. The best part of the whole thing turned out to be the practices. All we did was line up and play. We were all stars out there. We didn't need anybody to stand above everybody else. We'd all been playing ball all our lives. We knew who we were. Chuck Daly, he'd just say, come on, let's have an hour or two, let's get loose. That's all he did. He didn't coach, he didn't call fouls, he just threw the ball out there. The games were competitive as hell. It was up and down the court. We had 12 players, but John Stockton had a broken leg. Christian Laettner was on the team, but he was still in college, and no one would let him in the games. We played 5-on-5. If Magic got off to a good start, or anybody else, the talking would start. These were the teams. Me, Scottie Pippen, Chris Mullin, Larry Bird, and Patrick Ewing. That was our five. They had Magic, Drexler, Malone, Charles Barkley, and Robinson. We whipped their ass every day. So, Greg, any reflection on this section? I just wanted to keep it in because there's just a funny anecdote in there.
The biggest reflection for me is three names that appeared back to back in there with potentially three of the greatest nicknames of all time. You've got Clyde the Glide Drexler, Carl the Mailman Malone, and David the Admiral Robinson. That's just wow, chef's kiss. It's absolutely perfect.
Yeah, they don't do nicknames like that anymore.
No, they don't. And that, I mean, maybe boxing. That's probably the only sport that does it anything like that again. But sort of, actual reflection, it's iron sharpening iron, right? Chuck Daly's got the easiest job in the world, right? Roll the ball out, light a cigar, and just watch the greatest basketball players, arguably of all time, just play pickup basketball. I mean, me or you could do that. You'd probably didn't need to be a basketball coach. You probably needed to be a bit more of a boxing referee to split things up. It's great. It's obviously competitive. It's obviously what they needed to succeed in those moments, and it's just pure talent.
So Jordan and the Bulls had won three NBA championships between 1991 and 1993, which was the three-peat. And on July 23rd, 1993, Michael's father, James Jordan Sr., was murdered. I think everybody knows at least a little bit about that story, unfortunately. And in the summer of 1994, Michael shook the world by stepping away from basketball to try his hand at pro baseball. And here is his mum's reflection on this situation, which of course is a very unfortunate one. He and his dad had always talked about what it might be like if Michael had played baseball instead of basketball, because they both loved baseball. His daddy said, "You'll never know until you try." That started them talking about it. Michael held tight to his plan even after the death of Mr. Jordan. One of Michael's dreams was to see if he could hit the ball as well as he did when he was younger. It was a challenge, and he loved challenges, but it was all about holding on to a dream. You could never say I can't around our family. How do you know if you can't? Go try it. That was the slogan for us. If you try, then you can't fail. You have failed if you don't try. You only have one life. Don't allow someone else to live that life for you.
Duncan, this is an incredibly powerful reflection from Michael's mother, and it really does reveal that different context and what many people saw was a shocking decision there. That line, "You'll never know until you try," I think that captures the spirit of curiosity and the courage that his dad instilled in him. So stepping away from basketball at the absolute height of his career, it wasn't just a professional move. I certainly don't think it was a marketing move, which a lot of people thought about it at the time. It was deeply personal. And I quite like that it honored a shared dream between him and his dad.
Well, he was incredibly close with his dad, and obviously just a horrific moment. And in the book, there's quite a bit about that baseball journey. But Jordan returned to the Bulls on March 19th, 1995, famously announcing his comeback with a simple two-word press conference, which was, "I'm back." And he played his first game back the next day against the Indiana Pacers. And here's a little bit about his reflection when he came back to the Bulls. And he says, "When it came back, I didn't have to tell anyone anything. I showed them. I let my actions speak for me. I didn't have to tell Steve Kerr what his role was on those Bulls teams. They could see what I expected of myself went beyond the normal expectation. My expectation was excellence each and every time I stepped on the court, whether it was in practice or a game. I was there to win. I didn't have any other agenda, and they knew that." And Greg, another great reminder, kind of actions express priorities. And he goes on to say, commitment cannot be compromised by rewards. Excellence isn't a 1 week or 1 year ideal. It's a constant. We have become a shortcut culture. There will be days when you don't feel on top of your game, or meetings in which you aren't at your best, but your commitment remains constant. No compromises. No one on the Bulls teams ever missed a month with a sprained ankle. We took precautions against those kind of injuries, but when they occurred, we did everything possible to play through them. We were going to be the very best every night we stepped on the floor. That approach created an atmosphere and an expectation that every player and coach understood. Look around the league today and you see players missing weeks of games with sprained ankles. You didn't want the abuse that came with missing games on the Bulls. We had a shared commitment to the unit. Dennis Rodman could do whatever he wanted off the court and away from the team because we knew once he came back into the group, he had to plug into the team.
Duncan, I love that line on commitment where he says, "Excellence isn't a 1 week or 1 year ideal, it's a constant." And that's a really powerful mindset. He's not interested in excuses, half measures, constant discipline. It's telling how he contrasts the Bulls' shared toughness and accountability with what he's seen as a growing culture of compromise and shortcut culture and ways around things in the league. I think there is a cautionary tale there because we don't want people putting themselves in positions to re-injure themselves and perhaps do more harm than is necessary. But there is a lesson there about sort of toughing through things, and when there is discomfort without the danger, being able to push through those physical and psychological barriers that we've seen with a bunch of our endurance athletes.
And of course, he comes back and wins three more titles between 1996 and 1998. And I just want to wrap up here with a few more reflections from Michael. And he says, I wanted others to see me as I saw myself. Fear of failure? Why would I have any? I didn't know where my dreams would lead. I had dreams, but I didn't have all the pictures because they didn't exist. So I could push ahead with my eyes wide open, take in whatever happened and move on. I wasn't limited by someone else's view of how my dreams should look or whether they were reasonable or not. I couldn't have imagined everything that has happened, but dreams are like that. That's what makes the journey so interesting. Put all the work in and then let the future emerge. Anything can happen if you're willing to put in the work and remain open to the possibility. Dreams are realized by effort, determination, passion, and staying connected to that sense of who you are. Why me? Why not me? Some players look at me for all the wrong reasons. Marketing, admiration, money made off the court. They don't understand the foundation I had to create to support everything that came afterwards. They don't know about lifting weights at 7 a.m., practicing hard every day, finding ways to motivate myself for every game, sitting up half the night with an ankle in an ice bucket, or hooked up to an electronic stimulation machine. They don't know anything about those things. What they do know is that I have my own shoe line and that I did McDonald's commercials. In a sense, my experience created a vision that obscured the hard work and commitment. With all the attention on the surface, it's easy to become confused about the source of money and glamour. You have to be uncompromised in your level of commitment to do whatever you are doing, or it can disappear as fast as it appeared. Some players noticed me because of everything I was doing off the court, and that was the wrong reason to pay attention to me. Pay attention to the way I played the game. Pay attention to my passion. Pay attention to the idea of focusing on improvement every day. Pay attention to my commitment. And that is where we'll leave it. But as always, success leaves clues. So Greg, what are your top 10 life lessons from Driven From Within by Michael Jordan?
Life lesson number one: dream big, start small. Success begins with mastering what's in front of you. He says, I wanted to be the best player in the park in Wilmington. With each progression, I gained confidence. Number two, find strength in discipline. Discipline is the cornerstone of excellence. He says, excellence isn't a 1 week or a 1 year ideal. It's a constant. Number three, stay true to your identity. Authenticity amplifies success. He says, I never wanted to be average. Whatever I was going to do, I wanted to do it my way. Number four, effort shapes leadership. Lead by example, not by position. He says, my expectation was excellence every time I stepped on the court. Whether it was practice or a game, I was there to win. Number five, adapt your motivation. Motivation isn't static. Learn to create it when needed. He says, I had to search out and find reasons to play every game at a high level. Number six, commitment over convenience. Shortcuts weaken the foundation of success. He says, we've become a shortcut culture. No compromises. No one in our Bulls teams ever missed a month with a sprained ankle. Number seven, harness feedback as fuel. Challenges and criticism are opportunities to grow. He says, Phil Jackson would say, you're not going to be able to do that tonight. Says who? Number eight, learn from the process. Process often stems from incremental improvements. He says, I let the game come to me before I impose my will. Number nine, stay humble and hungry. Success should fuel the desire to improve, not settle. He says, pay attention to the way I played the game. Pay attention to my passion. And finally, number 10, see what's possible. Exposure to greatness unlocks belief in yourself. He says, I got a glimpse of what success looked like. I saw where I fit in with the best players in the country.
As always, Greg, a fantastic top 10, as you'd expect from one of the greatest of all time. What are your top 10 things to avoid from Driven From Within by Michael Jordan?
That's quite the compliment. I don't consider myself one of the greatest of all time, but here we go. Top 10 things to avoid from Driven From Within by Michael Jordan. Number one, relying on hype over hard work. Substance must precede spotlight. He says, some players noticed me because of everything I was doing off the court, and that was the wrong reason to pay attention to me. Number two, letting comfort dictate effort. Growth happens in discomfort. He says, if somebody didn't want to hear that from me, fine, but go and play somewhere else. Number three, taking shortcuts to success. Success demands discipline and consistency. He says you have to be uncompromised in your level of commitment, or it can disappear as fast as it appeared. Number 4, dwelling on external validation. Focus on proving yourself, not meeting others' expectations. He says no one knew what I was capable of scoring, and no one tried to define me. Number 5, avoiding conflict. Constructive friction elevates teams and individuals. Rod Higgins says if the other guys didn't take their effort up, then Michael had no problem embarrassing them. Number 6, losing identity to expectations. Stay rooted in your authentic self. He says I wasn't limited by someone else's view of how my dream should look. Number 7, failing to adapt motivation. Every day requires new sources of inspiration. He says, I had to trick myself. I almost had to find a test within the test. Number 8, undermining commitments through rewards. Never let rewards dilute your drive. He says commitment cannot be compromised by rewards. Number 9, neglecting fundamentals. Small, consistent efforts create greatness. He says, let little things add up to big things. And finally, number 10, mistaking fame for mastery. Fame is a byproduct, not the foundation of greatness. He says, what they do know is I have my own shoe line, but they don't know about lifting weights at 7 a.m. or practicing hard every day. Thank you so much for joining myself and Duncan on this episode. As we said at the beginning, please support the show by rating us 5 stars on your podcast platform and writing a review. That'll help us grow the show, and for that we are truly grateful. We'll see you next time on Performers.